What up, folks? What's going on? Welcome to the Spun Today Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and this is episode number 72. In episode number 72, I speak about watching 13 Reasons Why on Netflix. It's a new show. Listening to a dope new podcast that I stumbled upon called Bronzeville. Watching Adam Sandler's new movie called Sandy Wexler. And beginning to watch a 6-part documentary series titled Time, a Khalif Browder story. If any of that sounds like something you'd be into, stick around and listen to my ranting on it, my take on this stuff. So first up, 13 Reasons Why. As usual, I'm going to spoil a lot of shit, so if you haven't seen it and you plan on watching the series, skip ahead a few minutes. But the story is, the plot of the story is a high school girl that kills herself. And you find that out straight off the bat. And she leaves behind a series of recordings. And in these recordings, she details the 13 reasons why she wound up doing what she did, which was taking her own life. So it's dark. I wasn't... I guess based on knowing what it was about, it didn't completely hook me into like, oh, you know, hell yeah, I wanna watch this. But it did sound somewhat intriguing, and my wife wanted to watch it. I watched the first couple episodes with her, and I felt that from there on out, like pretty much each episode is one of the recordings, and I felt that from there on out, it's more of the same. Not in a redundant sense, but I don't know. Like I don't know. To me, I just felt like I know where this is going. I can, just catch like the last couple episodes, which is what I did. I think I saw like the first 2 or 3, and then like the last 3 or 4 with her, and I missed a chunk in the middle. But or maybe even more than that. I probably caught like the last 5 because it started getting like better. I guess not that it was bad. I liked it. I just felt, whatever. Didn't want to watch all 13. I like the fact that it's based on a book by Jay Asher. Like I've told you guys in the past, that's like a bucket list, unattainable type dream that I have to see a book that I write get turned into something that I could watch on the screen, preferably like in a theater or something like that. But obviously, being picked up for a series would be dope. So that aspect of it is really cool. It was well written, in my opinion. The acting, I thought, by the main characters, which was Hannah, the girl that killed herself, and Clay, was phenomenal. I thought. I had never seen either one of them, and it was like really, like I really felt their performances. So that definitely helped enhance the experience of the show. I had a bunch of cool characters. It's a high school setting mainly, so it was interesting to kind of see. I like high school movies. My wife does also, and you see the usual archetypes that you used to see, back when you were in school, when I was in school. The nerds, the popular kids, the jocks, the cheerleader type girls, the pretty boys, the I don't know, geeks, smart kids, et cetera, et cetera. You had like the whole gamut, all the, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, stereotype, archetype, the usual motherfuckers that you see in high school. You have the goth girl, you have the gay kid, you have the poor kid, the rich kid, like the full gamut. Something that I've always applied, at least in my life, or I've seen applications of throughout my life, is in relation to high school, is that everything is high school played out over and over again, just with older people. So like the clickiness that you see in high school, same exact shit exists and in the work environment, in different places of business, different groups of friends, family, like different things. It's like the same dynamics continue to play out over and over again, which is interesting because you like, that's your first, I guess, taste of freedom if you will, if you want to call it freedom, when you first enter high school, because you are not completely treated like a little kid, even though you still are, when you're 15 to 18 or whatever it is. But your world changes, because your world opens up much more, compared to, elementary school, obviously, and junior high. Once you get into high school, you're surrounded by a lot older people that are considered adults, like, let's say seniors, 18 years old. They're, considered legally adults, obviously, but people doing more adult shit, sex, drugs, smoking, drinking, stuff like that. And it's interesting to me. It's always been interesting to me that you get exposed to that at such a young age, relatively speaking. And that, again, the same dynamics just continue to play out throughout different facets of your life. But, it's a typical high school movie in that sense, that, you have the interaction of all those different types of people. And you have this girl at the center of it, which is the new girl in school that transfers in from a different school, and the usual, has no friends, has a hard time assimilating and stuff like that. And then she just had ella estaba sala, as we would say in Spanish, like she was, which literally translates to she was salty, but not like in a salty as an angry type of way, but she was just like salted, just like had bad luck. She's victim to the two-faced backstabby shit that happens in high school, and again throughout fucking life in general, and getting her heart broken, and liking a guy that likes another girl, and dating a friend's ex, and typical teenage bullshit like that. But she wound up being like hanging out with popular kids, and she wanting to be popular and have a lot of friends, but then becoming like the butt of a lot of their jokes, and long story short, being considered like the class slut, and just like tape after tape or episode after episode, which again, each episode is based on one of the recordings on a tape that she left behind, is dedicated to each episode is dedicated to a specific tape and a specific reason why she wound up killing herself. And it's pretty much 13 different people and how they negatively affected her life. And she described what happened to her, like, notes being passed around about her, being the class slut and being stood up for dates, and just like everything went wrong for this girl, like from literally being raped, spoiler alert, to reaching out in a crowded party, reaching out to hold hands with the guy that she had a crush on, and somebody walking by and bumping into them, and her not reaching his hand, and then never second guessing herself and not reaching out again to hold his hand, even to little minute shit like that. Like, shit just didn't work out for her no matter what. She was clearly like troubled in the head, and like traumatized about all this stuff. I mean, you have to be a certain level of traumatized to off yourself, right? And it's interesting the way that they shot the show is that she's like narrating the show technically by the main character now, which is the guy that she had a crush on, and that really had a crush on her back, but just couldn't find the words. A typical shy high school kid couldn't find the words to express that to her. He is one of the people that are replaying these recordings and listening to her again post-mortem explain why she did what she did, and as they're shooting the series, I feel like I'm doing such a shit job of explaining this. As they are shooting the series, and she's he's listening to the tape, and they are showing what she's talking about. So it's like a flashback mixed with omniscient narration from her, and it melts back and forth between flashback and current time, because he's like going to the places that she says, I went to so and so's house for a party, and he goes to so and so's house at night, and he stands outside and he's like envisioning what happened based on what she's saying on the tapes, and they're showing you on on the screen everything that she's saying. So it's pretty cool in the way that they shot it. A big takeaway that I got from the show is towards it's definitely the last episode. I think it's the very last scene, but I could be wrong on it. It could be close to the very last scene. It could be like the first like false ending. And Clay Jensen, which is the main character, the guy that I just mentioned, he's speaking to the counselor in the school and says, as a frustrated teen that, went through this traumatic experience of this girl that he loved killing herself, says, and like reliving her story pretty much, says to the counselor, quote, "Somehow the way we treat each other has to get better," end quote. And that's obviously, taken like within the scope of the show, obviously has to do with, the way, like the fellow student body or whatever, and the people involved and stuff like that treat each other has to get better, but on a larger level, applicable obviously to just like human beings in the world. I appreciate how they showed the immediacy of, well, like right after he said that, he left the office and he goes into the hallway and like immediately implements his own sentiment. Like it's not like he decides to practice what he preaches like right there and then in that moment, because he knows that moments are fleeting and you could, lose people at any minute. And he didn't just want it to be like lip service. And he sees a girl that he used to be friends with. She's like the goth girl. And when they got to high school, they drifted apart, and I guess he wasn't like as cool with her. It was just like high and by type shit. Kind of ignored her. And he was more of like not a preppy popular kid, but definitely not like a goth kid. And he seemed to be more of the, cool with everybody type kid. And he sees her and like stops her and asks her like how she's doing. And I feel that things like that, that was cool for me to see, like that immediacy of it. And things like that we say, or changes that we want to see, it's like that cheesy but true saying of be the change that you want to see in the world. It's like, don't just stop with the somehow the way we treat each other has to get better. Actually do it. Just start treating people better. And he did that with her, for example. Then a second big takeaway for me was her reciprocation, which ties into Hannah, the girl that killed herself, in my opinion. And just the whole underlying through line, throughout the film, which is, to me, being able to express yourself. For example, she was thrown off a bit by, him asking her if she's okay, because, they hadn't spoken in a long time, and like that. And he asked, if they could go hang out or whatever, ditch and like go somewhere and just like talk and chill or whatever. And she asked if he's okay. He says no, which was, forthcoming and honest of him. And then he asked her, is that okay? That I'm not okay. And she said, yeah. And that to me signifies like that acceptance and like that being okay with understanding and accepting and being accepting of other people's feelings and shit that they may be going through and different emotions that they express. And like that is super important of a message to like put out there, especially like within, I guess, that target audience of, younger, like high school kids and stuff like that, and show them how when you isolate yourself too much, or if you're going through some shit and you don't ask for help, that shit's unhealthy. you need outlets, you need hobbies, you need, me personally, I've always been someone I'm very like introverted into myself and stuff like that, aside from the fact that I've recorded 72 out fucking podcasts and put them out for the world to listen to. I'm very introverted to myself, and honestly, before getting into podcasting and writing, these have been like the perfect outlets for me, because they're like introverted, personal, individual hobbies, but that allow me to express myself how and when I want. And we all need that type of release. It's I've told you guys ad nauseum that, this type of thing is like cathartic to me, and it's like my meditation, my therapy, or whatever you want to call it. And everybody has their own version of, you know what I mean? And for someone like Hannah, in Hannah's case in the show, like, she didn't have like shit to release. And when you're in high school, like, that's your world, like somebody just fucking teases you in school or something like that, that's fucking like scarring, and that's like, oh my god, the whole school knows about this and that, and it's like the end of the world, you know what I mean? And you don't have the foresight to realize that it's just high school, and it boils down to petty high school bullshit, which again, in a lot of ways, spills over to other time periods in your life when you experience similar things, but at different levels, whether it's in the workplace or whatever. It's still that, petty type of bullshit. Like, it's never that serious to like kill yourself, I think, in my opinion. But it's important to like look for signs of people that express being troubled, and I'm not a fucking trained psychologist or anything like that, so I can't tell you exactly what to look for, but just generally just being there for people, talking to them, and again, just being accepting of who they are, and being with them when you're with them, being present when you're with them, not making it like a negative or confrontational vibe when you're chilling with them, and like little things like that go a long way, I think. And if her character had more of that, I feel, from a friend, from a boyfriend, from her parents, which were preoccupied, they loved her or whatever, but they were preoccupied with financial troubles, and they had a pharmacy that they were running, and they were like in the red, and they were very preoccupied with that. Didn't really spend time with their daughter and stuff, at least within the time period that they showed us in the show. If she just had that from somebody, things probably could have worked out differently. But anyway, that is my takeaway on the show. Again, it's called 13 Reasons Why, and it is currently on Netflix. Brownsville is a place in Brooklyn. Bronzeville is a dope new podcast that I feel that you're either going to love it or love it. But being realistic, you're going to love it or hate it. It's going to be probably a polarizing one for you guys. For me, I loved it. I listened to it twice, the entire series. Season 1 of it is available. It dropped in February, and it was dropping like on a weekly basis. And it is all 10 episodes make up the full season 1, and each episode is about 45 minutes long. It's based on a true story. It's a period piece out of 1940s Southside Chicago, post Al Capone, like after Al Capone died, right after. And it's the story of an affluent, vibrant neighborhood called Bronzeville in the south side of Chicago that was fueled by organized crime, but not of like the Al Capone regime. It was a black owned, black operated, black run neighborhood. In a time when there was still a lot of racial tension, It's post Jim Crow, in the North, but not too far removed from all that bullshit. And the way they did it is they absolutely did not skimp on production quality. They call it a theater of the mind, or a theater for the mind, and it 100% was. I feel that, you guys know, take this with a grain of salt, because I'm biased as fuck, and I think podcasts have the ability to fucking change the world in ways that I wouldn't even know how to explain. So that said, fuck, where was I going with that? I just lost my train of thought. Podcasts are the shit, and it's dope even in this sense that podcasts are audio, obviously, right? You have some video podcasts and stuff like that, but primarily audio. 90% of podcasts are listened to versus watched. And even the video podcasts, you can just listen to the audio versions of. It's interesting in the sense that it's like advanced technology, quote unquote, in the sense that, it's available at your fingertips. There's so many outlets and different ways that you can consume podcasts. But it's like an old concept, right? Like a radio concept that was like pre-television times. And part of me, I like that, the juxtaposition between like that futuristic type of technology mixed with this like visceral connection to the past of listening to something like Bronzeville. That's a theater for the mind. I envision like Ralphie and Randy in front of the radio listening to Little Orphan Annie shows, you know what I mean, before TVs were a thing. And it's kind of like that type of experience, and that's pretty dope to me. So it's a really cool story, like I said, and there's definitely going to be a season 2, because I believe it's a pretty popular show, and they left it off, unfinished. So there should definitely be a season 2. But a really dope thing about this too is, aside from the production quality being sick and this just being like a new type of thing, it's not like Serial, it's not like this podcast, because obviously the Spun Today Podcast is in its own stratosphere of awesome, right? It's like its own thing altogether. Like, it really is like a theater of the mind. It's like you're watching a show. And it was actually pitched as a show, as a TV show. And I'm leaving the best part for last. But it was pitched as a TV show, and supposedly there was a lot of interest behind it, but obviously not enough to make it into a TV show. But the story was so rich and so dope that they wanted to tell it somehow. They decided to release it as a podcast, which is validating for podcasts in and of themselves, that they're getting this type of it's becoming like such a viable outlet. The sickest part is the people that are behind it. It's a star-studded cast, and I'm just gonna rattle off a few of the names. Lawrence Fishburne, yes, Morpheus, is in it. I think he's a producer of it, directed a couple episodes of it, and he's in it as an actor. Lorenz Tate is in it, which is a dope actor, and is a motherfucking vampire. I don't care what anybody says. That dude hasn't aged since fucking Menace to Society. It looks exactly the same. You have Tika Sumpter, Omari Hardwick, Wood Harris, my man, fucking Avon Barksdale from The Wire, Lance Reddick, which is Lieutenant Daniels from The Wire, Brittany Snow, and they actually described the show in an article that I read as a cross between Boardwalk Empire and The Wire, which is a pretty dope, pretty close comparison there. So if you're into any of those shows, you might be into this, especially if you're into podcasts. And just if you're into podcasts and you haven't seen those shows or not into those types of shows, just give it a shot. Just as a dope, new, innovative way that the platform of podcasts are being used to tell stories. Again, it's called Bronzeville. spelled Bronzeville. I will link to an article about the show in the episode notes, as well as to the actual links where you guys could find the podcast either on iTunes or Stitcher. If not, just search. If you listen on a different platform, just search for Bronzeville, and it'll definitely pop up. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Sandy Wexler. So this movie has gotten shit reviews, and I don't know if I'm a contrarian or what it is, but I thought it was good. And I'll tell you why. It's Adam Sandler's latest movie that's on Netflix, and I think it got I saw somewhere like a 1.5 star review and 2 stars, and Rotten Tomatoes score is horrible, and people that I've spoken to have told me that it sucked, but I liked it. And I think the problem is that just because it's Adam Sandler, we expect it to be a comedy. And I don't think that's what the angle was with this one. I mean, it had funny parts. It was funny. It's probably in the comedy section for the same reason. It's fucking an Adam Sandler movie. It definitely had a handful of funny parts, but to me, that's like the B story. The funny aspects of it was the B story to the whole thing. And to me, and I could be way off, obviously, but whatever. It's just my opinion. We're all multifaceted people, and it must be frustrating for someone that's good at something, making people laugh and telling jokes and shit like that they get pigeonholed into just that. And whenever they try to do something else, something different, they're like, hey, wait, that's not the funny stuff, and this wasn't as funny as your other stuff. And I feel that from, if I was in Adam Sandler's shoes, I would be like, it wasn't meant, I didn't mean it to fucking be funny. I'm a funny person or whatever, so funny moments come out and shit like that. But to me, it was just a story of Sandy Wexler, who was meant to be depicted as the antithesis of the typical Hollywood douchebag agent talent manager guy that we all think of when we think of the typical Hollywood agent manager guy. A douchebag, scumbag, sleazeball kind of character. And this Sandy Wexler guy, although he had his flaws, mainly and probably most annoyingly to me, the way he ate, super sloppy, and lied or told people just what they wanted to hear and stuff like that. I think that the movie showed that you could stick to your guns. You could be who you are and still make it to where you want to go, to where you want to be, to, even if you're playing within the confines of Hollywood that has its, rules and ways that people are supposed to act, and glamour and this and that and posh and blah, 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 and all that type of bullshit. Sandy Wexler was a middle-aged Jew that, just cared about his clients, wanted the best for them, and did what he could to get them where they wanted to be, and took on clients that he felt weren't pieces of shit, and hustled and worked hard for them. And to me, that was the main takeaway of the movie. Be you. We all have flaws. You don't have to sell your soul to make it. You can make it on your own terms. And that's not to say that, that you don't have to be dynamic and open-minded and stuff like that. Obviously that helps. But it's not to say also that you have to sell your soul and you have to be cutthroat and fuck people over and be that dude in order to make it in Hollywood or make it in whatever the fuck it is that you're into. Do what you want to do because you want to be doing it, and do it how you want to do it. If not, it's not worth it. Right? I mean, think about it. If I'll take me for example. If I started, writing things that I wasn't into or that didn't interest me, I wouldn't want to do it, even if they were like more popular or whatever. If I started doing 15-minute long podcasts on how to make money off Google, how to make money, like all those like get rich quick schemey type of like clickbait type of things that would make more money than the podcast makes now, I wouldn't want it. It wouldn't be worth it. I don't want it that way. I want it my way or not at all. And I think that was at least my main takeaway from the Sandy Wexler movie. So if you go into it with an open mind and you don't go into it, looking to see the funniest movie that you've seen all year type of thing, I think that you will find the movie enjoyable. Time, a Khalif Browder story. I heard about this documentary on a podcast. Shout out to Brooke of the Actual Innocence podcast that did I'm not sure if they put it out on all of their podcasts, but it was like a four different podcasts, like Rabia Chowdhury from the Undisclosed podcast, which was the person that reached out to Sarah Koenig regarding the Adnan Syed story. And she was part of the Serial podcast, and in terms of, she came out in it. She was the attorney friend of Adnan Syed. She has her own podcast, and there were two other ones, I forget, but them four came together and did a panel on Brooke's Actual Innocence podcast, which I've mentioned in the past, and they were speaking about this documentary. And Khalif Browder, for those of you that don't know, is a young man that was incarcerated here in New York at Rikers Island for 3 years without going to trial. He spent, out of the 900 some odd days that he was awaiting trial before it wound up getting dismissed because they had nothing on him, and what he was accused of, which was stealing a book bag, never happened. Technically, he broke parole by getting arrested for that crime that he never committed, of stealing a book bag. And because of that, he was arrested, but wound up getting dismissed after the 3 years. Anyway, 2 of the years, or like 600 some odd days, he spent in solitary confinement. Now, the UN, which is obviously a separate entity in and of itself, but I think it helps add some important context to the story, and something that I highlighted from watching it and listening to the podcast, is that the UN designated being in solitary confinement as torture after 15 days. 15 days, 1-5. They consider it torture, like akin to waterboarding motherfuckers, which is illegal in war. And this dude was in solitary for 200 plus days. He did a stretch of like 10 months straight, came out, and went back in and did another stretch of 14 months straight. The documentary does an awesome job of pointing out the psychological ramifications that being exposed to something like that has on people, and how it literally drives people crazy being in solitaire. And psychologists reference like different studies that were done, literally showing that it drives people crazy. It's a mind-altering experience being in solitaire after a certain amount of time. And this was a kid, again, that was 16, if I'm not mistaken, when he got locked up. And like before, he was on probation. He's from the Bronx. He was from the Bronx, and he was on probation because he went on a joyride on one of his friends stole the bread truck or something like that. Like somebody was delivering bread and they jumped in and drove it around the block or whatever. They took a joyride, they drove it around, and he got arrested for that and was on probation. And then this whole book bag thing happened a couple years later, or a year or two later, and that's what landed him in jail. And he was a small kid, short, skinny, but tough and like a smart aleck. You know, he would talk back to the guards, he would talk back to other inmates and stuff like that. He got into tons of fights. He got jumped a lot. There's videos, if you guys remember, you know, it was a national story. He wound up being on like Rosie Perez on The View. He was on Bloomberg. I remember seeing him on Bloomberg, actually. Jay-Z is a co-producer of the show, and actually said that Khalif is a modern day prophet, and that this story is important to be told. And just because of all the negative shit that gets covered up that happens within our prison system. And this story is one that made significant ripples and got national attention. And actually, Rikers Island this year, they decided that it's going to be closed. I don't know exactly when. I think it's like 2018 or 2019, but it's going to be closed. And stories like this, you know, help that along. Unfortunately, Khalif, when he came out, finally, because the big thing with him was that he didn't want to take a plea deal because he maintained his innocence all along. And one of the issues with our criminal justice system, the way it's set up, is that the system is incentivized by convictions. And this ties into the war on drugs that I've spoken about in the past, the failed war on drugs that I've spoken about in the past. Police officers being incentivized to arrest people, you know, privatized prisons. Not that Rikers is one, but just that culture in and of itself. It ties into all that shit. But he didn't want to take a plea, which would be, you know, pretty much saying, yes, I'm guilty of this. And they say, okay, we're not going to charge you with this. We're going to, you know, you're pleading guilty to a misdemeanor, and then you get out with, you know, X amount of time probation instead of having to stay in jail or whatever. He didn't want to take that plea because he maintained his innocence the entire time. And that wound up having his case postponed time and time again, which was my biggest beef with this whole thing. His case kept getting postponed and postponed because the prosecution was buying time pretty much because they knew they had shit. Now, when you get arrested, you have the right to a speedy trial. And speedy trial is defined mainly as a 6-month time period. You have to be seen by a judge and judged by a court of your peers or whatever within a 6-month period. Rikers Island is a jail, not a prison, so Rikers is kind of like a temporary stay type of thing where, you know, people go, ideally, you know, 6 months, you're there and you see a judge, you're not guilty, go home, you're guilty, you get sent off upstate to a prison to serve your sentence. But then you have cases like Khalif Browder's where he winds up staying for 3 years in Rikers. And why is this? Because of, again, my biggest gripe with this entire system, or in this case in particular, is that within the state of New York, that 6-month speedy trial, that time constraint that you know, as a citizen have a right to, as a fucking human being have a right to, is riddled with bureaucratic bullshit. They explain in the documentary that the time that you're serving, that you're waiting pretty much for your trial, doesn't count towards that 6-month speedy trial clock when certain conditions are met, like certain little loopholes that they use happen, such as like postponing because the witness can't appear on a certain day, so they postpone it for a few weeks or a couple months, or if there's no available courtrooms because there's such a backlog of cases to be heard or listened to that they can't coordinate the the judge and the court to settle on a date to meet, so it gets pushed. And bullshit like that to buy time, which is what the prosecution was doing it for, because the witness that they had, the quote unquote eyewitness, had left to Mexico and was nowhere to be found, and they couldn't get in touch with him. So they, would say that he'll be here in 2 months. They get a judge. The judge sees it and sees the case. And when the case comes up, they say, I couldn't produce my witness today. Can we get a postponement? The judge usually grants that. And then, 3 months later, they see them again. And those 3 months don't count towards that 6 month speedy trial clock thing. And it's absolute bullshit. And, you have a different judge each time. And, they don't, judges are saying, 70 cases a day. And especially in the Bronx, that has a huge backlog, supposedly one of the worst in the entire country of cases. And then these people that are caught in the middle get fucked, like people like Khalif Browder. And it's like, to me, like, that rule shouldn't exist. Like, whatever the reasoning behind it was initially, whatever, courtroom logic, lawyery bullshit, that shouldn't exist. Don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. Don't tell me I have 6 months, within 6 months I have the right to a speedy trial, etc. Except with this caveat, except if we can't find the room to see you in, except if, so-and-so doesn't show up. Like, no, 6 months means 6 months, period. That's the way it should be. Not 6 months, but it could be 3 years. Like, no, motherfucker. If there's rules, the rules have to be followed. And if the rules that you created within the institution aren't in line and aren't working, aren't gelling, aren't flowing with the system the way it's supposed to, the burden shouldn't be on me. I shouldn't have to wait 3 years because you can't get your shit together and you're clogging up the system with nonviolent crimes and you're arresting people for fucking dime bags of weed and creating a situation where public defenders have to go through caseload after have more cases than huge law firms deal with just for one fucking public defender. So they literally can't care even if they wanted to. And then judges are seeing, 70 cases a day, and you're creating this environment, this system where that 6 month guarantee that I have, quote unquote guarantee under the Constitution or whatever the fuck, isn't true, isn't valid. So it shouldn't be that way. And I'm not naive. I know there's bad people out there, but I know there's good people out there too that just get caught up in petty bullshit, like taking a joyride at fucking 15 years old on a fucking bread truck and then walking home from a party and some scared kid that got robbed, pointing you out in the street to a police officer saying it was him because, there's another black guy. And, you wind up serving 3 years, 2 years in solitary, and he literally got out and was in school and got his GED and went to college. He was in a BCC, Bronx Community College, and had a 3.56 GPA or something like that, but just was completely troubled and traumatized from the whole jail experience and shit like that he wound up killing himself, this kid. And this might be like an extreme situation, it can be like, this exact thing happens every single day. Because maybe not to this extent, but it does happen far too often than it should. And again, it's based off of a system that's broken. You can't continue forcing shit through this broken system. That shouldn't be that way. That's not efficient. That's not... And look, I'm not like I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like tree hugging, hippy dippy, everybody's great, love everybody, let everybody be free, no jail type of fucking dude or something like that. When it comes to violent crimes, when it comes to rapists, murderers, fucking the worst of the worst, motherfuckers that are convicted of, without a doubt, 100% convicted of shit, DNA evidence, like a rapist or whatever, motherfuckers like that, to me, should literally be like draped in the American flag and dropped in the middle of an ISIS training camp. Let their heads get sawed off and mailed to their mothers. Like literally, they're like piece of shit human beings that shouldn't exist. I'm 1,000% for that. But then on the flip side, when you have nonviolent crimes and just a situation, a machine that allows the Khalif Browder story to even exist, that shouldn't be. That has to be fixed. That has to be changed. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. I know the system gets it right more times than it gets it wrong. But that can't be where we stop. That can't be like, it's right more times than, more often than not. So whatever. It's good enough. Like, no, it's not good enough. It's not good enough for that kid that lost his life, for others that have lost their lives, for that kid's mother that lost a son, for his brothers and sister that lost a brother, for the hundreds or thousands that are wrongly accused and convicted and caught up in the same type of bullshit now, currently, right now, today, within our flawed system. It's not good enough for those people. And it absolutely shouldn't be good enough for any of us. It's a sad fucking story, man. And to me, it's like the fixes aren't that it's not like we have to like redesign the entire, blow up the entire system and redesign the whole thing and change the consciousness of an entire country. And like, nah, change little shit like the fact that like legal aid representatives they're incentivized not by the conviction rates or the amount of people that they get off. They're incentivized by the quantity of cases that they close, like either way. So if you change that, if you align their incentives differently, say incentivize, based on how many people they get off, or disincentivize plea deals, you eliminate that systemic inclination to go towards copping a plea deal, especially to young kids that don't understand, they just see in front of them, go to jail for 2 years or go home right now. But if you go home right now, you're going to have this on your record for the rest of your life and you're going to be on parole for 5 years. And if you get the glimpse of being arrested within those 5 years, even if it's something that you don't do, you might wind up in solitary for 2 years straight. You know what I mean? Like, change little things like that. Like, it's like frustrating because it seems so obvious, like such obvious fixes, and it's just clouded by like bureaucratic bullshit. And it's been done like this since 1770. Like, fuck 1770, whatever the fuck. It shouldn't be done like that anymore. It doesn't work. Not as well as it should. But whatever, guys, check it out for yourself. Again, it's called Time, a Khalif Browder Story. It aired on Spike. It's co-produced by Jay-Z. And if you Google it, you could probably watch it online in a bunch of places. I actually didn't know Spike has... You can go to spike.com and watch it on there. You just have to log in with your credentials from your own, Time Warner or Spectrum or Dish Network, like whatever your cable provider is. Like, log in at spike.com and you could, watch it on there. It's a 7-part documentary series. 6 or 7? I think it's 7, actually. 7-part documentary series, and each episode is like 45 minutes to an hour long, and they break down the entire thing. It's definitely worth the watch, and I recommend it to you guys. Lastly, speaking of making change, or attempting to, I don't know if you guys remember a while back, a few episodes back of the Spun Today podcast, I mentioned how a college professor of mine, told me about an event that my old college was having, Baruch. Shout out to Baruch. That where like an current cop and or like an assistant DA or something like that, we're gonna go speak at the school about police violence and to spread awareness, etc., etc. Within that episode, I had like not an epiphany, but just like an idea that came up off the top of the dome regarding police officers, going door knocking within the jurisdiction of their police precincts and giving out flyers, informational flyers of, what to do when they get pulled over, when people get pulled over, and just to spread awareness in that way, kind of give that in-person, kind of get that in-person connection, reintroduce the vibe of police officers being part of a community. I feel like it's gotten to a point where it's like an us versus them type of mentality, and